A lot of sense. Yeah, I remember one of the more interesting things we ever did was we sat down at AEI and you guys put us through a war game with China and Taiwan. And before that, I didn't realize that that's what happened when we sometimes explain things to policymakers, where even that might be what happens inside of the Pentagon. Can you explain what a war game is?
Yeah, it's a way of creating in this case, a geopolitical sort of scenario, and giving people the opportunity to understand that if you make one particular decision, they invade, they don't, our response is this kind of air power, this kind of naval response. That means we're moving resources from some other part of the world, for instance, right? And so you actually start to realize what's involved in these decisions. It's always trade-offs, right? And so when you're engaged in kind of a large-scale military effort, it means there's other capabilities that you don't have elsewhere in the world. And so war game, it kind of puts people in that scenario and makes you understand from a cost perspective, from a personnel perspective, what sorts of decisions that might seem easy if you're just watching a cable news show all of a sudden becomes super complex. And we've used it in other scenarios too. I mean, I worked in the George W. Bush White House for a few years, and I was there during Hurricane Katrina. And, we realized that there were certain war game scenarios that had been played out before that had relevance to that time. When you have 500,000 people displaced from an urban area, and this was not too many years after 9/11, where we thought that something like a dirty bomb could happen. Like, what would happen if a radioactive bomb went off in a city and now all of a sudden 500,000 people couldn't live there anymore? What would you, first of all, there's the site, but then there's the dispersion of people. And we were faced with a situation because of what happened in New Orleans, that you basically did have 500,000 people no longer living there that went to Houston, or they went up to Tennessee, or they scattered about, and there wasn't a really great preset federal response for how to actually get resources to people so that they could, stay in hotels or pay their rent or get the resources that they need because of this horrific event. And you can use that type of war game precedent to actually make decisions. So it's helpful in terms of guiding policy, but it's actually really interesting to participate in, as you saw.
Wait, so how does that work? So basically, you're an advisor to the president at that time in the White House, and you guys are trying to figure out what to do with Katrina. Do you go to like a file and you're like, here's all the historical war games we've done?
I wish.
Option one.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for. I found that war game, there wasn't an exact war game that really prepared the federal government for that. I had kind of hoped that the dirty bomb scenario would create some off the shelf stuff. Yeah. Got us a little bit of the way there. But that was a situation of making policy kind of on the fly with imperfect information. And this is a time when you do also rely on policy experts around the country. I mean, we were calling people who had written papers about this type of scenario, who had studied what kinds of federal resources could be used most nimbly, and we had to make some decisions in a really short period of time. And President Bush wanted to have a really large response to this issue, and he had a plan of being out in New Orleans within 10 days, and we had to have a bunch of big policy proposals. So we made a lot of decisions really quickly. Some of them were mistakes, in terms of the right kind of federal response. But that's different than when you're preparing for a State of the Union address, maybe 6 months ahead of time, where you got a lot of time to plan. So you're always looking for outside expertise. No administration has all that expertise within the White House or within the Office of Management and Budget. It just doesn't exist within one administration. And so you're always looking for people outside who know more about this issue than you do, involving them in the policy process. And so that's where think tanks come in. It's where people that have a perch at a university who are really good come in. And you find in those jobs that you really need those people. I was there during the run up to the financial crisis too. There's a housing crisis that preceded the financial crisis, and that was the same thing where really, really smart, well-known, published economists had very different views about the reality of that situation. And it was really, really hard to know what to do, because some of the smartest people in the world whose advice you were relying on just saw this in sometimes 180-degree different ways from each other. But you still need to talk to those people, and you still need to make smart decisions. And if a White House is running well, it takes expertise actually very seriously.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, my friend Tim Kennedy, do you know him?
I don't.
You should have him to Civitas, but he's a active member of the military, but he was one of the people that went in for Pineapple Express, remember, in Afghanistan. And then he brought a group of people with SABR allies to go get people out of North Carolina. And he was talking about what it looked like, on the ground there. But it's really interesting to think that, if you're in business, you might go to Harvard Business Review and look at the historical case studies and say, we have something going on here, like which other company has it ever been through? And you might pull some of those ideas to think like, could we solve it? I had never thought about, does the White House have like components that are like that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you find you get thrown into these jobs and everything's moving so fast and you have all the things that you're supposed to do that day. And then by 10 a.m., there's 4 more things that you hadn't planned on when you got up that morning to deal with. And so people's ability to focus for a long period of time on really important things is actually really limited. I mean, time is an amazingly scarce resource. And so having worked in that environment has given me a lot of sympathy for administrations that have come, after us, because when something big is happening in the world, and there's a lot of media criticism for what seems to be like double messaging coming out of the White House, or the administration doesn't seem to have its act together. I'm like, it's probably because they don't yet. Like they actually have had a couple advisors go out in front of cameras saying different things from each other, and maybe the president didn't even know they were out there saying that because they're trying to formulate a response. I mean, it sometimes just happens in sort of a chaotic way because of everything that's going on. So a smartly run administration kind of prepares for that, and you try to kind of pick your experts in advance, people that that you can trust, to get a good catalog of people around the country on a variety of issues, and hope your policy councils are all doing that. We used to have, like every summer, we would have the heads of think tanks from around Washington and also even outside, just handpick some of their own scholars and bring them in for like a 90-minute briefing. And we'd have the president's economic advisors, domestic policy, homeland security, national security. They would sit in a room and just let them kind of tell us about like what they saw as kind of big issues in the world, and they would become sort of a resource after that, for our staff, because you can't staff that up internally very well.
No. I remember hearing something crazy that I don't remember if it's true or not. Is it true that the Pentagon has run like, I don't know how many war games about China versus the U.S. and we don't win in any of them?
I don't know
Taiwan.
Yeah, I don't know that. I hope that's not true.
I didn't sound very good.
Yeah, there's got to be a scenario within which we win, but I don't know.
Yeah, I remember Mackenzie, one of the scholars, was talking about that we didn't win any when they did it with the Senate and Congress. So like war games were run between the two groups and they didn't win any. But I was hoping, you would think the Pentagon wouldn't let that out either. They're not. I imagine they're not going to be like, the thing is, we're preemptively losing.
Yeah,
that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, that's right. Or maybe that's what they want people to think.
Maintenance, 3D. So this is why I took the business. Okay, there was one other thing I wanted to talk about. You literally just got on a plane back from DC, and you were there all week. What's the vibe like there right now? Is everybody freaking out?
It wasn't as crazy as I thought it would be. Yeah, this trip was planned for a while, and so I kind of expected to be there and they'd still be counting votes. I didn't expect it, like everybody didn't really expect this to be resolved the evening of. It just depends on who you talk to. There's a lot of panic among Democrats. There's kind of a strange amount of optimism among people on the political right. I think probably when I say surprising, I think it's more people that have been Trump skeptics, Trump wary, and even anti-Trump. I think there's a number of them now that's like, well, we've seen the show before with him, and there's also some real opportunity for maybe some disruption and reform in areas where we need that. And he's got his issues that he's really hyper-focused on, but that means there's opportunity within his administration elsewhere to get all kinds of other things done that are broadly aligned with what he cares about. So it's kind of it was an interesting time. I think everyone's just kind of sitting there just nervously waiting to see what happens. And, you go from one day where like Marco Rubio's name is floated for Secretary of State. Everyone's like, well, that's a good decision or whatever. And then the next day he puts forward Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. Everyone's like, what in the world is going on here? So it's like, here we go again, sort of chaos and disruption. So there's kind of just nervous expectation, and some people are kind of nervously optimistic and others are nervously really, really worried right now. So like everything else over the last few months, all we can say is who really knows what it's gonna look like there come January. It's hard to say. And with John Thune becoming the Senate Majority Leader, that creates maybe a little bit of a break on the sort of MAGA elements in the Senate, because that was a hotly contested race too. Is Trump going to be able to get all of his people rubber stamped? Is he going to run into opposition within his own party? And I think given that vote, that's possible. So that'll create some dealing even within the GOP when it comes to appointments and decisions that are being made kind of early out of the gates.
Yeah. What about, I mean, well, first of all, I have been watching Twitter like it's prime time. I mean, I can't ever remember watching every cabinet position and say, like, who's it going to be? What's going to happen next? I think it's an American phenomenon that is reminiscent probably of like The Apprentice. I mean, it is incredible.
I think that's what they want you to do, right? Yeah. I actually got off Twitter before it became X. I mean, I burned out on it. Yeah, I got to the point where I realized I don't even like the people I like anymore. Yeah. My friends on Twitter I've long loved and followed, I'm like, I don't even really like them anymore, so I'm just going to, I want to keep liking them, so I'm going to stop watching them on Twitter. And I hung it up. And to be honest with you, I've not missed it. I mean, I go there because people will make announcements there, or a lot of times in my world, there's a really interesting study that gets released, and someone tweets it out. So I find myself going over there for content, but I can't do it anymore because I used to do that too. I mean, election nights on Twitter used to be really fun, because just listening to everybody's hot takes now. No,
Zero watching X.
No.
Wow.
No, just watch the returns and stayed off of people's, hot takes and, all that stuff. Yeah, decided to sit it out. I felt a lot happier and better.
That's very mature of you.
No, I don't know it's mature. It was just some self-awareness about what makes me a better and worse person.
Well, I want to talk about what you're doing today, because one of the reasons I want to have you in here is because we talk about it a lot, but, the university system, it seems to have a lot of problems today. And, from us watching student protesters pro-Hamas at NYU to watching what happens with, different racial divides at school, to wondering if students and teachers are really learning these days. From an outside perspective, the university system kind of appears broken, or at least under attack in some way. And you decided to start the Civitas Institute at University of Texas. Why? And what do you think you guys are going to be able to do different from inside one of the world's largest universities, University of Texas?
Yeah, the Civitas Institute is a great new creation. It's created to essentially be part of a much larger effort to kind of reclaim a place within this large Tier 1 great esteemed public research university, to kind of recover the basic principles of the American founding, of a free society, of the kind of commercial and economic life that supports and is the lifeblood of that society, to teach it in a historically accurate and proper way, and to do research that kind of advances these ideas and helps us understand what a free society should be looking like in the future, and what a growing and dynamic economy should look like in the future, and where we can make reforms possible. So Civitas, the best way to think of it is kind of a university-based think tank committed to those principles. So I've come from a think tank in Washington to build this organization into a similar type of thing at a university, which gives you access to all the research power of an institution like this, and really great faculty and experts from around the country to be a part of it. We are joined at the hip with this other a really important new effort called the School of Civic Leadership, and now technically housed within that school, since institutes and centers typically have to be housed within a degree-granting college. And this is a really exciting effort. The school is about a year old. It was created by the regents about a year and a half ago, and so it goes through a process of getting stood up, where a dean gets appointed. That's Justin Dyer, a great political scientist who's the inaugural dean of the school. And we've been hiring faculty into the school. And so we have gone through our first round of faculty hiring this year. Those people have shown up this fall. We're going through another round now. And by about the third year, we'll have about 20 full-time faculty teaching in the school. And the school is very much committed to constitutional studies, Western civilization, economics. It has elements of what people are familiar with the British PPE model of education. It's kind of, yeah, it's a philosophy, politics, and economics. It's like, I think every prime minister going back to who knows what did that at Oxford. It's a great way of getting a well-grounded education in these topics. That we don't call the degree that. We have a minor that's called that. The degree is called Civics Honors, and it combines these great elements of what we would think of as a really strong classical liberal arts education. And so we have the school that will have its inaugural freshman class next fall. And then we have the institute, which I run, which is standing up a whole bunch of different research programs and events on these issues of economic dynamism, political liberty, constitutional studies, and a bunch of policy papers on energy policy, education policy, a number of different types of things like that. So why is this important?
And why is it different?
Yeah.
Because a lot of schools have economic departments. They have history departments.
Yeah.
So at face level, people could be like, this exists already. What is any different about it?
So what's different about it in the School of Civic Leadership is the multidisciplinary aspect of it. So you can, the best way to think of, I think, the new School of Civic Leadership at UT is think of it as kind of an elite, small liberal arts college on this large public university campus. So this where students are studying these things together. Part of the problem in higher education today is just the fragmentation of studies, and so you can study American history without really ever studying the Constitution or without ever taking economics at a lot of universities. And this is a way for students, if they get enrolled in this school, they apply to come to UT and study in this school. This is their major. They're going to get this multidisciplinary degree, and I think that it's going to. I think we'll attract a lot of students that want to go to law school or that want to get their MBA. I think we'll get a lot of students that want to go on and do graduate studies in policy, or they want to teach. I think it'll attract that sort of a student, and we're out putting out the word to get people to apply. And I think we have a lot of students coming from areas where they're just interested in the history of American institutions, and they're interested in the way that the economy is and the way it should work, and they want to study all those things together. There has been, I just think there has been this drift in higher education over the last generation to monocultures, where there has been this move of sort of political leftist ideology, which has become entrenched within universities. And I say this as a historical and empirical matter. There have been a couple of books written about this, or people done lots of surveys, and it's just a matter of fact that the political leanings of faculty have really moved to the left since the 1960s in this country. And it's happened kind of decade by decade by decade, to the point where people do get screened out of certain colleges and schools and departments because of their political ideology. And I won't say where, but I've actually watched it happen. I've sat in a faculty meeting once before where a decision was made that we should actually look at where people's political leanings were in their writings or whatever when making decisions about hiring them or admitting students in. It's a real thing. And if you come from a perspective of more free market economics and political liberty, which kind of aligns you with the political right, or you've worked for a Republican like I have, you just sense it where on university campus, or people just say things to your face where they just assume they know what you think about issues. You're kind of you're easy to put in a box for them. And so I think it's important to course correct. And I think that's what's been happening, not just here with this effort, but in other places around the country where it's not about creating something that's partisan. That's definitely not what we're doing. We don't screen any of our faculty or students based on political views. It's just that we're building a kind of educational environment that's probably just attractive to people that probably lean a little bit right in their worldview. Whether they're registered as a Republican or not isn't the best indicator of that. It has to do with how they view the Constitution, how they view the question of political liberty, and especially the questions of human agency. I mean, if you believe that people have a responsibility to build and make the life that they want, and they should live in a society that allows them to do that, and they should be able to exercise their free choices there, you're going to probably be attracted to an effort like what we have. So this is happening here at UT. The University of Florida has the Hamilton Center. The University of North Carolina has just started a new school of civic thought and leadership. Ohio State University has followed suit. This is starting to happen in a number of flagship state universities for very similar reasons, because there's just this growing awareness that we kind of need to recover a classical liberal arts education that helps prepare people for life in the institutions that run our country. So we can criticize those institutions, and that's what universities have become good at doing. We can try to undermine them. We can try to reinvent them or whatever. But the reality is we need people to be working in Congress. We need people in the media. We need people in businesses that have a civic function or have some role to play civically, to actually understand the institutions that they're going to be working in, their history, their origins, why they matter, how they function well and how they don't. And that's what I don't think our universities have been doing the best job of preparing people for. So this is a shot at doing it right.
Yeah, and you guys are attracting a ton of talent in the form of academics and professors who are kind of pissed. They're like, I'm tired of getting told what to think, where to think, how to think.
Yeah.
The point is to find the truth, not to have groupthink.
Yeah.
And so I've been really impressed at the roster that's coming over to you guys.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, there is an awareness of some of these dysfunctions that I've been talking about among a lot of faculty around the country. And what we've learned, I was pretty bullish about this. When I left AEI to come down here, I was really bullish about our prospects to grow, to get good talent, to create something big and great, and to make an institution, at the Civitas Institute, to make it like an AEI or like a Hoover Institution at Stanford, something of that scale and scope. That's our ambition, and I think we're on the way to doing that. And so I was bullish from the start. But even with my bullishness, I've been surprised at how attractive this has been to people. We've had people reaching out to us in an unsolicited way. We've been doing a lot of recruiting. We've also had people just reaching out to us saying, you know what, I'm kind of tired of where I am. I'm tired of the groupthink. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder to see if people are going to try to cancel me or shout me down. I want to be at a place where I can pursue my work out in the open and in the true spirit of free inquiry. And that looks like what you guys are building. So it's almost serving to have like a magnetic effect. And as awful and as horrific as the events of October 7th last year were, what it kind of unleashed on university campuses in the aftermath has also just accelerated that sense of urgency. There are some people, I think, that were going home and complaining about the campus culture where they worked maybe to their partner or their spouse, where they started saying that stuff out loud too. So I think there's just been something in that environment from last fall going through the spring protests here, where we've had people say, what you're building looks like a true university environment. That's what I thought I was doing when I went to graduate school, and now I want to be a part of something like that. So the environment has pushed people our way too. And then, if you've been reading these articles about, declining applications to Ivy League schools and people going to the SEC schools or applying there, that's true. I mean, we are seeing that at UT. And someone told me last week that our applications are up 98% year over year at UT. I mean, it's amazing how many people want to come and be a part of what we're doing. And not just to our school, but I mean to the university writ large. And I think I got that number right. But the anecdotes that you see, or the reporting that you might have seen in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal about people who you would think would be applying to the Ivies now applying to SEC, we're definitely seeing that as a true thing.
That's fascinating. 98% increase in applications at University of Texas. And we're seeing the Ivy League, so Harvard and Stanford and some of the historical best places you could go, where every parent wishes their child would go, actually determining that they want to go a different path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
has that ever happened before? Would this be the first?
I mean, I'm not aware of a historical precedent quite like this. And the thing is, for those of us who've been in higher ed for a while, a lot of the things that people have grown frustrated about over the last 5-7 years, critical race theory, seeing society as a set of structural inequalities or imbalances, and all that's kind of around that. I mean, this was not just invented in the last 5 years or so. I mean, when I was a graduate student in the late 1990s, we had critical race theory back then too. We had what we called the political correctness movement, But as a teaching fellow, as a graduate student, I had to go through trainings where we learned what words we couldn't say and all that stuff. I think what's happened is that enterprise, it's gone through several iterations, and this time it's just it's become more pervasive, and it's made its way into corporate HR offices, and it's made its way into K-12 education. It's become much more widespread in places where it hadn't been before, back in the days like when I was in graduate school. So there's just a lot more people aware of its effects, and they see the origins of it in the university world, in the world of higher education. And so they want, now people want to send their kids to places where that's least likely to happen. And I think on large, diverse public university campuses, it's less likely to happen there. And there's more checks and balances in a large public research institution. You are a university. You have trustees appointed by governors. You have state legislatures that provide oversight and funding. You have a student body from all across that state and beyond, and just many more departments. And so the way in which the monoculture sort of might capture an elite private college, or even I think some Ivy League universities very broadly, it's just less likely to happen here because you have these checks and balances. So people are figuring that out. and that's what they want. And just anecdotally, I run into this all the time. I mean, I was talking not long ago with a well-known economist who lives in Washington, D.C., sends her son to one of the elite schools in D.C. I'll leave it nameless, but people who know Washington, D.C. would definitely know it. It's one of those schools where every parent thinks their kids are going to be president someday or going to be senators or whatever, and they all go to the Ivies or they go to the elites. And she was telling me about how her son and his 7 friends are all applying to SEC schools, and that she and her husband are freaking out a little bit about it because they're spending all this money in this private prep school to send them to the elites, and now they found that their kids want to go where they can have like a real university experience, and they're pretty confident they'll get pretty good jobs on the back end of it anyway. So something's happening in a pretty big way right now, which is going to force some kind of accountability on, I think, some elite institutions that they haven't really felt the pressure to react to before. But I think it's actually going to change their behavior some.
One of my favorite CEOs used to say to me when I first came to the business that he'd eventually rub the MBA off me. And that always kind of made me chuckle. But now I understand a bit what he's talking about, because I think often, especially in some of these higher level institutions, I went to Georgetown, but you're sort of taught things in a way where you're like, this is the way to do it. This is the proper course to do X and Y and Z, which is hysterical once you're in business. Hearing somebody who's never been in business tell you the correct way to do something is really cute. And so I think I had that characteristic quite a bit. I want to talk a little bit about money and universities today. So student loan debt, all-time highs, almost $2 trillion. Over 100 of our taxpayer-funded in some way or another universities with endowments over $1 billion. Do you think the way we fund universities today is good for societies and kids, or do we need reform on that?
Yeah, we need reform. I mean, anytime you have a kind of a third-party payer system, whether it's in healthcare or education, you get all kinds of distortions, right? And so even the way that we've done student loans over the years has just made it easier for universities to run up the costs. I actually think that one of the really big problems is that growing pie slice. If you look at the university budget as a pie chart, that growing pie slice that has to do with just all kinds of programs that really don't have to do with classrooms, right? And hiring a lot of personnel to run all kinds of student-facing sorts of things that really aren't a part of the degree programs. And I think that's a problem. And I think that's had a really upward push on the cost of education at the schools. And so that when people are borrowing and then paying off over a long period of time, that's not really the university's problem. And so if they can continue to increase tuition every year, that's what they've been doing. And now we're at this point where it's a real problem. I think in some ways, there are policy changes that one can propose and people have. In some ways, it's kind of like these dynamics, these marketplace dynamics will probably have more to do with cost control than anything right now. When people start to realize that the value of that $55,000, $60,000 a year private college degree is actually not worth very much. And if employers are hiring the graduate from that public university as opposed to the elite school because they're worried that they're going to get a culture warrior from the elite school, that's going to create some discipline as well. And I'm not just speculating there. I mean, this seems to be what's happening right now. We're seeing this is certainly happening anecdotally. It's been reported more than once that there's a number of large employers out there. Like I don't want some of the students from these places where the campus protest has been going on. Just don't want to hire them, and that bodes well for the graduates of large state schools. And so I think some of that will condition the way university administrators think about costs. I think smaller private schools that have gotten very expensive, their business models are just turning upside down right now, and so they have to keep from going out of business at some point. So I think those dynamics are real. But no, there's definitely things we should be doing more of. I mean, the income share agreement model that's been rolled out in a few different places, I think that has a lot of promise. I think it should be more widespread. Yeah, and so it's basically a different, instead of a student loan like you would typically get from one of the big lenders, you basically, some universities have done this through a fund where you're basically paying back a portion of your income to a group of investors or to basically a foundation that a university runs over time. And so instead of paying the set amount, you're paying a percentage of your income. So if you're a school teacher, you're paying one rate. If you're at Goldman Sachs, you're paying a different rate. And it's a way of kind of just making it easier on the graduate over time to to pay back the cost of their education.
And theoretically, to incentivize the school to actually increase the ROI from college.
Yeah.
Because they want people who have higher incomes because they could theoretically make more money off them, right?
That's right. It's a good point.
I don't know if there's second or third order effects. I don't understand there. There probably are. Like then maybe people want deferred payment. Maybe they want more equity. Maybe you'd game that system too. But I think that's interesting.
Yeah. And I think there have been really good efforts by some university presidents that just kind of beg to be copied by others in terms of cost control.
In Indiana.
So Mitch Daniels at Purdue kept tuition at the same rate his entire decade he was there, never raised tuition once. And I'm from Indiana originally, and so I have friends who have kids at Purdue. That's like a household hero name there. And I know Mitch, and he's an absolutely amazing person and demonstrated that you can actually get costs under control. And if you add up everything that's done, you kind of get that net result. Nothing of it's sexy. You're just going around and you're selling off the fleet of university vehicles that they don't need anymore, and you're refiguring out the way that they do food in the dorms. Is one thing after another that he was able to do to make it possible to
while increasing the ranking. Right?
Yeah, right. While increasing the ranking.
So rankings increased, costs went down, and then flatlined for a decade.
And really one of the national leaders now in commercializing innovation. Purdue as an engineering hothouse was like, they have a research foundation where professors have been commercializing research on the scale of a Stanford or a Carnegie Mellon or whatever.
What does that mean, commercializing research? Where it get profitable?
Yeah, where an engineer or someone who's on the faculty of a university invents something or comes up with a new molecule that can be turned into a particular drug that can be built by a company or a medical device or something like that, and they work with people in the private sector at companies or investors to kind of come up with a new product line, and that professor and the university's research foundation get some of those returns. And so Stanford's always been kind of the textbook case of this. And other universities, especially those with good engineering departments, have followed suit. But Purdue's done a great job there too. And they've done all of this while the cost of going there has remained steady.
And how does that work? The engineer keeps a percentage of it, and the school does, and
it depends. Yeah, they all have different ways. Yeah, and I don't think very many universities do this super well. They could all improve in terms of the incentives that they create for faculty to commercialize. I did a deep dive on this about 10 years ago, and so my knowledge is a little bit dated. But you have a lot of various versions around the country of the same kind of bad practices, where some universities are very heavy-handed, and so there's not as much of an incentive for their scholars to work there. And so some people, including at Purdue, tried to kind of get ahead there. And I think at UT we do a good job of this as well. There's a great opportunity actually across the country for large research-based universities to kind of reconfigure the way that they do their commercialization agreements, their IP agreements with their scholars to get more intellectual property and all that's required to take an idea in a lab and turn it into a product that can be good for the world and also profitable for the people that were involved in it.
Like could universities become profit centers eventually, not based on could universities become profit centers eventually, not based on government taxpayer funding and endowments, but based on that theoretically and tuition?
I don't know. You would really have to ramp up the commercialization side, because universities is big. Yeah, and these are big, huge operations that do cost a lot of money. And so when it comes to the finance of that and the model, I'm not really sure. But I think if you were going to commercialize it that way, you'd almost have to have a university designed for that purpose that then also taught courses. I think it'd be pretty hard to take a large research university and make its revenue model based entirely on commercialization. But there are probably people here in Austin who might think of a way to do that.
Yeah, that's true. Well, the other thing that it just really ticks me off and blows my mind in two different ways is that, there's a little graph that I have here that we can put up for you guys to see on YouTube. But, the cost of university has gone up 4x, anywhere from 4x to 160%, I saw over a 40-year period. But the problem there is that the wages have really stagnated for people that have come out of it. So that's like, we have a growing gap between how much money you make from going to university versus the relative cost. But then we also are caught in a catch-22 because the median earnings for bachelor's degree holders is like 35 to 40% higher than those who don't have it. So it's like you got to go to college to make more, but it's more expensive than it ever is relative to how much you make. And so how do we fix that? Or do you think that the point of college is not to make us make more money?
It's a great question. There's a couple questions in there. And I think to step back and look at the broader issue, and this goes back to your original question too, just the cost of a university degree right now is way more than it probably should be for the value in a lot of places. There's a study that just came out this past week that shows actually in large state universities over the last year, costs have not risen as much. In some cases, they've gone down in net terms. There's a certain methodology that they use to do that. So I think a place like University of Texas, a place like Purdue that we're talking about, I think the value is still really there in the end for the family in terms of what comes out of their pockets or what comes out of their bank account and for the value that they get. I think the real problem are these really, really expensive, smaller private colleges. The elites, it still remains to be seen because they are still the elites. But I think the bigger story is that when you're in your early 20s, and I have two kids who are, you have the cost of school. And if you're carrying that debt, fortunately, my kids were fortunate enough not to have to be shouldering that debt, but a lot of their friends are. The cost of housing I think that's the big one. I mean, I really do think that the cost of housing is a huge one. Our healthcare system is also such that we pay a lot more personally than we would if we lived in some other countries. And that doesn't mean that you need a universalized system. You've got other competitive healthcare economies that just work better than ours does. And these things are all kind of barriers, not just to being able to afford a good home and have a middle class lifestyle. They're really barriers for people being able to become entrepreneurs early in their life. And this is your area of expertise, but to really be able to launch themselves much sooner. We really don't want to become like a European country where you have to live with your parents until you're in your 30s or whatever before you can afford to venture out. And we have been making decisions over time that have kind of put us on a path to that in some ways. And so a university education should prepare you for the world that you're entering in ways that I think a lot of universities just haven't. There's really, I think, a growing body and really interesting and compelling body of research that shows that really the most valuable thing about going to university is actually a lot of the stuff that happens maybe in a class, but it's not the point of that class. You are giving presentations, you're having to manage your schedule, you're having to write papers, and you're having to present, and you're having to work in teams. And what are sometimes called non-cognitive skills or social skills, or the kinds of things that you actually perfect in that environment, are the things that actually contribute to your earning power over time. So you might get a job out of college because of your degree. You might be an engineering student or something and get a job because of the kind of engineering degree you got. But 10 years from now, where you are is going to be based on all these other things. It's not going to be because of that degree. That degree is going to get you your first job, maybe your second, but probably not even that as much. It's these other things that you have learned how to do that really make you capable in the workplace. Conscientiousness, of the big 5 personality traits, conscientiousness is probably, it's one of the top 2 or 3 predictors of lifetime earnings. And that's the ability to think ahead, to be organized, to be a good listener, to be ambitious, and you combine all those things together and you get this trait called conscientiousness. And people who are high on that do really well. And that's what we should be thinking about when we're thinking about the best curriculum for students. So like in the School of Civic Leadership that we're standing up at the University of Texas, part of the goal of a multidisciplinary degree like this is to give students a really good grounding in American institutions, but to also create the instruction in a way where they're doing a lot of these sorts of things that I'm talking about. So they come out equipped for leadership within civic life in America, regardless of whether they're in business or they go to go to law school or what they do. That's where the real value is right now. And I think that's, again, the market's kind of sorting some of this out. When you feel like what you've got are a bunch of graduates from a school that have been indoctrinated in a certain worldview, and they're going to come and be like culture warriors in your company and create chaos, people don't want that. People want students that have had an experience, that have trained all these other sorts of things. So that's where the real value in a university education is, in addition to the actual topical major that you have. And I think the most innovative higher education administrators in the country are the ones who are figuring that out right now.
What about MBAs? Do you think those are worth it?
I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can only work from my personal experience, which is that it's a really nice credential to have. You know, people even to this day will say Codie Sanchez worked at Goldman Sachs in Georgetown, even though I wouldn't say those were at all my most formulative moments.
Yeah.
Could I quantify the value of those two things as opposed to starting businesses very high? Probably not. But I don't know I don't know if there's research or thought surrounding it, but there is the pervasive belief on the internet. Like if we go broad-based internet, MBAs are a scam. You should never do them. They don't actually make you money. MBAs are really only good if you don't know what you're doing. And if you want to figure out where to go next, or you want to climb up a corporate ladder, get an MBA. But if you want to do in business, go do business. And I'm not sure what I think about that yet.
I mean, I think it's one of those questions that probably has kind of a both and kind of an answer to it. Because I think
some of the critiques are going to have to do with the nature of just curricula itself, like what you're actually learning, and does that really prepare you for the marketplace? And the common critique I hear back is not really. Like a lot of times what you're learning in the classroom and then what you experience in the world are very different. But thought of as professional schools, where part of the experience of going there is the way that they are interrelated with the marketplace and with employers. They do serve as sort of funnels or training schools in many ways for really good jobs after that. And then that also conditions the way the faculty teach the courses, right? So, I mean, law schools are this way, good MBA programs are this way, where like during the course of it, you're not just taking classes, you're actually doing summer internships at organizations that you hope to get hired by in the future. And that integration of curriculum with the marketplace does seem to serve a valuable function, at least in some sectors and in certain areas. So, the large, I mean, we've got a very good business school at UT. It's got, the #1 accounting program in the country. I mean, I think employers really value that. Yeah, she's great. Our current president, Jay Hartzell, was the dean of the school and did a phenomenal job. So I think it's had a good run of good leadership. And I think it's done well in the rankings as a reflection of how its graduates have actually landed and performed in the marketplace in the way that it's preparing people for that. So it's kind of I think there's so many different MBA programs around the country. It's hard to provide just one answer there. But I do think that integration with the employer marketplace is a really important thing. And some places really do that well. And when you come down from like the top 5 or top 10 or the top 15 MBA schools to all the rest of them, I think all the more that really is going to be the determinant as to whether or not it's worth going there in the first place.
That's a great point. Yeah, one of the things I liked is when you and Jay and Justin, so all the heads of UT and then Civitas and the School of Civic Leadership were together at that last little get-together. That was one of the first things you were talking about, is that we're actively right now, before the program's even been created, looking for companies that want to work with these kids. And to me, like, it's great to hear theory from academics, but that practical application, or what you call integration, is probably the real key.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people use this euphemism of the most important part about going to school is your network. And they think that means the other students or the faculty. But I don't actually think that's right. It's, do I get to meet senior leaders at Deloitte, and thus I get to go work at Deloitte later because they had a program for easier access to entry to these large corporations, which are sometimes these large corporations are like paid MBAs, because they put $100,000. I mean, I bet Deloitte puts $100,000 into new hires in their specialty programs per year because they have massive training to do consulting, let's say. So I think that's really cool that you guys are doing that.
Yeah, and that's with the new School of Civic Leadership at UT, the students will have internships all the way through, and that's an important part of it. And
is that like great? So they have to? Like,
yeah.
Is it like,
yeah, it'll be a part of it.
It was mandated for me.
Yeah, it'll be a part of the experience, and so they'll get this really well-rounded education, and they'll have internships throughout the time. And for a lot of the reasons we were talking about earlier in our conversation, I think there's a lot of employers that will just be primed to hire them. For those that don't go to graduate school, I actually think they will. Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, because I think, a lot of people we want these sorts of graduates. I don't necessarily need someone with just the narrow degree topic. I need someone that can actually function in a complex and interesting environment. And that's what I think our graduates will be.
And I think a lot of corporations want ethics and morals in a different way. Like Tanner and I just brought on a new hire. His name is Levi. He's amazing so far. Don't listen to this, Levi, because you got to keep it up. But he brings a Bible and sets it on his desk every day. And, he asked if he could come in early because he has a larger drive. So he's like, I'd like to be here at like 6:30 in the morning because I have a little bit longer of a drive. And, finding people that are like ethically or morally aligned with not my beliefs. Like they don't have to believe the same thing that I do, but they have to want to try to be, a good person that believes in free thinking and contrasting opinions. And if they are, they'll work well here. And if not, they won't. So I don't want to get them anyway.
Absolutely. It's hard to quantify and it's hard to study, but to the extent that we can study the way that trust develops when we're studying social capital, like, closely knit, well-functioning organizations or communities, and how trust is developed and earned. I mean, in high trust areas, you have higher productivity rates. You have in geographic regions where you have more social capital measured even just by civic and voluntary participation, you have higher levels of regional GDP. People, when people live and work in high trust environments, they can get more done in a shorter period of time because there's less sand in the gears, there's less friction, there's less problems to sort through. And if you've run an organization, or I've been fortunate or cursed, however you look at it, to start organizations or start organizations within organizations and grow and build things, you just know this. I mean, you just know that having people of integrity, people that are honest, people that are hardworking, that are motivated by kind of a good moral framework and work well with others, you can just get so much more done, and you can actually all be going down the same track together, instead of having to deal with all of the friction and dysfunction that comes sometimes from the one squeaky wheel too. So, anyone who's run something, you probably made this mistake. I know, or maybe no one else has, but I have, where you're like, that person has some characteristics that made me nervous, but they're really, really good at this one thing that I need done. And you're like, we'll figure out how to deal with that other stuff. And it's like, yeah, you know what? You will deal with that other stuff. And it'll take up a lot of your time, and it'll upset other colleagues, and you'll end up loading other people up with work because you don't trust this person anymore. And it's a real headache. And so I think, this groundedness, in a core set of principles that enable you to be the conscientious person that I was talking about earlier is really what anyone running a company or an organization wants. And so we should take that seriously when we're educating our children, and then when we're designing higher education environments for them at university or community college or whatever the post-secondary world is that they're in. It's absolutely essential. When I've gone around the country and looked at effective like vocational training, so for people that don't go to a 4-year university, where you have these really good programs, is usually not by a policy design. It's almost in spite of federal and state workforce policy, which I think is an area that's ripe for reform that no one has ever quite figured out. You'll see that a lot of times it's employer partnerships with a community college or a vocational school of some kind, where part of the curriculum is this stuff, saying earlier, students benefit in a 4-year degree program because they're just forced to do presentations and work together and plan and all those kinds of things. When you're like a commuter at a community college, that's less a part of your experience. But the effective programs are often those where you have partnerships with employers, where that kind of leadership training, planning, problem solving, presenting, working in teams, those kinds of things are built into the experience so that they can actually have graduates of those programs that have those same sets of skills. So there are different ways to kind of encourage integrity, honesty, the right kind of ambition in people. And I think they should be really central to anyone designing curriculum. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be central to what you're doing.
That's a good point. So say you're a parent and you're trying to figure out where to send your kid to college, or you're a student, or you're a young person yourself, and you're trying to figure out what actually matters. What do you do? How do you screen these institutions?
Well, I think you should send them to the School of Civic Leadership at the University of Texas. But yeah, definitely send them there. Send them our way. I think the issues related to all the culture wars on college campuses, a lot of that can now be seen. I mean, some of these schools have been out there, back when they were all on the right side of history, planting their flag on this or that cause over the last 5 years or so. They're now paying a price for that. And you don't unwind that stuff overnight. So I would be very wary about sending my kid right now to an Ivy League school that's been all in there. And just talking with faculty at those places and people that have recently come from them, it just kind of reinforces. It's like, I would just be worried. And I have plenty of friends. I'm in that age where I've got people, my peers have kids in college, and it's amazing over the last few years, the number of complaints that I hear from people who sent their kids to what should have been not that long ago a really great, outstanding elite institution, mostly in the Northeast. So I think you want to look at how much these colleges actually spend on the non-classroom facing side of the ledger. I think that's a big one, like I was saying earlier. You want to look at the constitution of the faculty in the departments where they're going to go. Do they really have ideological diversity there, or do they have people across different disciplines? And can your child get an education where it's well-rounded, where they're not just in a certain narrow track, or they can just kind of choose electives to kind of just patch together something that's kind of meaningless over time. There's not just one thing to look at. There's a bunch.
God, that's so much harder than back in the day. We used to take like the USA Today rankings or whatever, see which one was best, and like try to figure out how they're in there. I think that was basically as crazy as it went.
Yeah, no, I think you want to be a little bit more careful now, and look at look at whether the university has embraced a statement of principles about. There's a Chicago statement of principles of academic freedom. A number of universities have done that as well, and I think you should take a look at that. It doesn't mean that even if they sign the statement that every department in every way is doing that, but at least there's a commitment there. And I think those are pretty important indicators right now.
So if your kid right now got into like Princeton, Harvard, an Ivy League school, would you say, hey, let's think about this?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, it's just probably because I have friends who have had their kids there where they've had a bad experience. Not everyone. I mean, others have had a great experience. A lot of it does depend on the department, the specific school or college that you're in, but I would be wary of it right now. Both of my now adult kids graduated from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. We used to live in the UK. They wanted to go back to the UK for college. And, that's this great elite institution. Is over 600 years old. It stands on its this amazing set of traditions, but they haven't, and this is typical of a lot of universities in the UK. They haven't grown that slice of the pie that I was talking about. I mean, they really focus on instruction. They focus. It's students, it's professors, and you have a bunch of student associations. But the academic format, the seminar-based learning, it's the same as it's been for a long time. Students know why they're there to learn, and they had an amazing experience. Does the student body have as a collective, do you have all the views there of all kinds of issues that you would find on any university campus? Of course. But they haven't been weaponized in the same way that they have in a lot of American universities. And we have to ask, why has it been so easy, it seems like recently, to actually weaponize ideologies on university campuses when it's actually not happening in the same way in other countries? And we realize we have kind of I think it's a very distinctive American problem. And when you have the president of France telling us not to import all these crazy ideas, the country that gave us Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault and
God help us,
that gave us that saying, please stop sending all your crazy ideas back our way. I thought that was actually kind of telling and actually a little funny.
Yeah, that gets my favorite. I love a good conspiracy theory. So that's so many to count there. I remember I was sitting at an event. I don't remember if you were at this one or not, but it was with one of the Ivy League presidents versus another well-established university that was not Ivy League, and the very counter opinions. And I remember being shocked because the president was basically saying, of the Ivy League school, was saying, we don't have any ideological divide here. Actually, we're very measured. And there's no one side that has everything. And in fact, we don't even have that much of a higher percentage on one side than the other. And no, we really didn't vote for one candidate versus another. And I remember the audience all kind of looking out. And then we have these beautiful library of Alexandrias at our fingertips, aka Google.
Yeah.
So, and they're asking questions like, well, how about this 80% number here? And how about this? But what was fascinating to me was the depth of either the denial or the non-agreement or the belief that it wasn't an issue or the gaslighting or whatever. I had from somebody who is very intelligent.
Yeah. Now, this is very common. And I, just because of the nature of my professional work and trajectory, I spent a lot of time around kind of two communities that have this attribute that you're talking about. One is just higher education. The other is the media, where you'll talk with very smart, well-meaning people. And they're not trying to dissemble on purpose. They really do think that they're in an institution where there's a healthy amount of ideological diversity, because from their perspective, there is. But for the rest of America and for the rest of us who don't fit within the continuum of diversity they're talking about, there's all these people over here that just are not represented on your faculty or in your institution. And you see this in newsrooms as well, just within the media. And if you spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C., as I've had to do in my career, and you go to a lot of dinners with people like this, there's just a lot of shared assumptions that you're in the fishbowl, you're swimming around, you can't see the water that you're in. And we all think that we're not going to become like that. But it's actually very easy to become like that when you live and work with people that all share some basic assumptions. It also helps explain like why, even this last election, in the predictions that we saw, and then the shock at the outcome was because the people who are basically covering and also reporting and creating the news have so many shared assumptions that they just can't get themselves out of it to actually make other kinds of predictions or speculations. And there's probably some reasons for that are related to even what we've been talking about. I think I have journalist friends who've looked into this more than I have, so I'm just reporting on what they've told me. But just over the last generation, the way that so many journalists, especially for the top papers, come from a lot of the same colleges and universities, it's that same sort of thing and the same socioeconomic status. And you don't have, and like in the old days where you'd have, just kind of street beat like reporters walking around without an ideological agenda, just doing the investigative thing, covering the news, reporting on it, from middle class backgrounds, from working class backgrounds, from all over the country, that you've seen even within the media class a kind of it's like they've coalesced around a certain shared set of assumptions that are very consistent with what they would have gotten from the universities that they went to. So I hear this a lot in when I'm on university campuses. I'll hear people say, like, why are you guys doing what you're doing? Like, we've got plenty of diversity in higher ed. I mean, there's a lot of people that think differently from each other. And I just think that's just clearly not true. I mean, and any survey that we've seen of university faculty shows that's not true. And there have been similar surveys done of journalists as well. And we realize that they have political leanings that are much more similar than they are different. And that becomes a problem. It does, you understand why in the American heartland there's such a distrust of expertise. And I say this as someone who lives within the world of expertise. And as I started out saying earlier, when we were talking about time with wise, you need experts. And I am a strong believer in the value of what we might call elite institutions in America. We need our universities and we need governmental organizations to help implement policy and all these kinds of things. But when there's arrogance, condescension, and a resistance to true free inquiry, then you've got a problem. And that's where just ordinary, everyday Americans can sniff that out. I have them in my extended family and my friends back home, and it's, you don't have to look very far to find people who aren't a part of elite society who have a pretty good read on what's wrong with it.
Yeah. I think that's the most fun part about having a podcast and doing what we do with YouTube and going out. And, the other day I was with a guy who runs a porta potty company. And so I'm like helping him clean out porta potties in Houston, Texas, and then we're with Spencer, who runs garbage trucks just one day a week. And he's a software guy during the week. And so like you get all these different perspectives that quite honestly, in America, we have a lot of divergence of socioeconomics that we don't touch that much. And so when I go and stand in the lobby of AEI and I'm sort of in awe of like the beauty of this institution, well, guess who's not coming in there often? Spencer, who drives the truck outside of Dallas, Texas. And so, I think part of this and what's happening in the U.S. is interesting because I think it's showing a light on average Americans, which they want to have a couple weeks vacation. They want to be with their kids. They don't want you to tell them what to do about their kids. And this kind of transcends race, actually. Yeah. And I'm Latino, and I just always have a chuckle when a white person who's never been to the border tells me about what's going on at the border, when I used to be a journalist there and I've crossed the border innumerable times. Mm-hmm. And so I always kind of chuckle a little bit about how we are so set in our ways when we haven't seen them from another's perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And that is, I think we're seeing play out kind of on the national stage right now. There was a really great large national survey this last week, and I'm forgetting the organization that did it.
We can find it.
which is, yeah, I can send you the link.
Okay.
The
We'll put it on the show notes.
Yeah, put it in the show notes because it's a really, really great survey. The sample is like over 3,500 people or so, and it's a meaningful sample where they looked at, after the election, who people voted for, what category were they swing voters in swing states, and what issues motivated them. And for all swing voters, inflation was a huge thing, and just the sense that the Biden administration and then Kamala Harris as a candidate, wasn't paying attention to that. But when you look at the people who identified themselves as swing voters who eventually broke for Trump, the issue, the culture wars issue, outranked the inflation issue for them. And we know now that like the Trump campaign spent like $250 million on that one ad about transgender in prisons, when Kamala Harris was talking about supporting transgender surgery in prisons and all that. They found that moved undecided voters in their testing more than anything. So they just ran that thing like crazy.
Well, how about his one-liner too? It was like, you can love him or hate him, and most people are only on one end or the other of the spectrum. But his line about she's for they, them, I'm for you. I was like, the guy is made for TV.
Yeah, no, and that turns out that for people in those swing states that were really important, those battleground states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, the ones we all were hearing about and watching for months. I found it hard to believe there were still undecided voters in this country, a month ago or so, but I guess there were. And these issues really, really mattered for people. So I think the reckoning on, the COVID era, school closures, public health experts dissembling before Americans and getting caught doing so. I think these gender issues that have, again, it's the amount of time they've taken up. It's not so much that people have these strong views about the issues themselves. It's that it's being told that this has to be the most important thing when inflation is high. And I think and then the free speech on campus stuff has actually played a lot. So these now have emerged in surveys. These have emerged as issues we now know that really motivated a lot of voters. And back when we were building the Survey Center on American Life at AEI, which my now former colleague Dan Cox is doing a great job of running, he's a great pollster. We did all these big, large national surveys trying to drill down a few layers beyond just political attitudes to see what really motivated people. And we found, like other large surveys, like More in Common has done and a few other organizations, that from the heated summer of 2020, the George Floyd pandemic summer, when we had all this unrest in our cities and all the aftermath of that, when culture wars were really kind of taking off, 2/3 of Americans, whether they were Democrats or Republicans, when you were asking them to rank order the things that were most important in their lives, it was jobs for their kids, it was public safety in their neighborhoods, it was really bread and butter issues. And culture war issues that seemed to be on the national stage in bright lights were really not showing up at all, except the public safety one, because of the unrest in cities. We saw even people in suburbs of cities that were experiencing a lot of violence were saying they felt really unsafe, even though crime hadn't gone up on their streets, because it was just around, it was in the news so much. And so I think, just so many people in the elite class, especially on the elite left, just did not learn these lessons. And this they should have seen this coming, because, a lot of people, including myself, were writing about this. We're like, look, I mean, even in the wake of the George Floyd murder, you have a lot of inner city residents saying that public safety is the most important thing. The last thing they want is to defund the police. It's been kind of one thing after another, where there's been this kind of arrogant disconnection from what ordinary people, even their own constituents in their own cities and neighborhoods, were telling them that they refuse to believe were all that important. And now they've paid a political price for it. And now Donald Trump's going to be president again because of this. And I think, a lot of the narrative has been on him capturing the popular vote. And that is incredible, given how Republicans haven't done that in a long time. But he still got a lot fewer votes than Joe Biden. She got way less than that. And so there's another, his victory is an amazing kind of political comeback story, one of the most ever. But her slide from 2020, like her performance with key demographics, doing so much worse than Joe Biden, I think is explained mostly by these issues. And I think as we study this more, I think the inflation one will clearly, just feeling like we have an administration that's not doing enough about the cost of living was a big thing. We know that's true. But these other issues, of elevated importance when most Americans wanted them ranked more like 9, 10, 11 on a survey, and you have this kind of progressive elite trying to get you to rank them 1, 2, 3. People were just exhausted by that and were for a long time, and now we can see that more clearly.
Yeah. This is a little bit off topic, but I was looking at a survey the other day. The survey said, I'm going to mess up the exact number. I'll link it below. The survey says at the highlight of the article is women-owned businesses have a 35% higher ROI than male-owned businesses. And I was like, that's fascinating. Really, that would be stark difference.
Yeah.
How? So then I clicked on it. And as I clicked on it, what the actual survey was in one private equity fund, their portfolio at that time had 35% higher ROI from the female-owned companies than the male, which, was maybe a couple hundred companies, highly specified in the CPG space, which is dominated by women predominantly, lots of beauty products. So not exactly the same headline. You have specialized in studies and polls and how to conduct them for a long time. Do you have a couple tips for those of us who we see these headlines everywhere? Mm-hmm. We're seeing polls everywhere. They're fucking wrong all the time. They're lying to us with numbers. How do we quickly ascertain hey, that's not a reasonable piece of data to use, or that's not a good study to be conducted? Are there a few red flags we can look for?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good question because people are citing surveys all the time to make the point that they want to make. And you've seen this in the political polling. You probably heard people talk about it, just the margin of error, thing. There's a whole debate about margins of error and all that too. But if a sample size is small and a margin of error is 5 to 6%, then 52 to 48 doesn't really mean anything in that regard, right? And so that's not a 4-point advantage. It could be the other way. So that's the main one. I tend to look for the size of the sample. Is it a lot of people that they're surveying? And is it a credible survey company that has successfully built sort of panel studies over time where they've predicted things pretty well? And so I think when you have these really small samples, large margins of error, and it's not clear that this sample is representative of the population as a whole or the population we're trying to learn something about, some subsector, then you should be wary of it. And if it's a complete outlier from other surveys, that might tell you something too. It's well, maybe they have found something that no one else found, or maybe that's just completely wrong. So that's another one. When we started building the survey center at AEI, one of the things we wanted to do and did early on was a big national survey on a whole bunch of issues, but included within the questions we asked were the 20 questions from the UCLA Loneliness Index, because we learned everyone was talking about the crisis of loneliness in America. But when we were trying to figure out what surveys they were like exactly how they were measuring that, we realized that we kept clicking back to this one, I won't name the organization, that did a survey with about 800 people. Most of it was skewed old in terms of the average age of the participants. And everyone was drawing all these conclusions from this very small, kind of crappy survey. And so we could only find one other large national survey that had been done in the last decade that could be considered representative and kind of credible. And I felt like the results were mixed. So we did a large national survey, and our results were fairly similar to that other large national survey. And so we found that the question of loneliness is very nuanced. It's, you have to be careful when you're saying all young people are suffering a crisis of loneliness, because it's actually not true. There are certain types of young people that are very lonely. And it's you want to tailor your response to that population and not start drawing conclusions from everything. Well, that means all social media is bad. And, there's that whole if you're on Instagram, and that means you're probably miserable. And so it's well, some people are, but there's a lot of people who are on social media a lot who aren't miserable. And so that tells you something. It's well, let's try to understand what it is about the people who are miserable so that we can fashion either a policy response or a public health response or something that's accurate. And we were motivated to do that work precisely because of the problem that you said. It was just accepted by everyone. We have a pandemic of loneliness in America. And then we're show me the evidence for that. It's well, it's this one survey that's really bad that everyone kept citing.
What's fascinating is that's kind of how it goes. It's like turtles all the way down. There was another survey I was trying to find original data for, and it was something about entrepreneurship. Oh, you know what it was? It was a statistic that I've used before that now I'm worried about, which is that the average entrepreneur of a company makes $47,000 a year on average. And I thought, God, that's that's not that high for the risk that one takes to become an entrepreneur. If that is true, then your risk-reward basis is actually super off, and we should rethink this whole thing. And I cannot find for the life of me that study linked anywhere except to a very small study done by like a one-off company I've never heard of that did it in 1 year that was like 2019. And so now we're trying to figure out like what actually is the average pay. And I think I came to you too with a lot of the stuff around small business. And you were like, the thing is, small business statistics are really hard to find. And even the SBA doesn't survey that well. And so, you know, you're not going to know about this because you're healthy and not on Twitter. But I did have this little giggle about, you know who Nate Silver is, right?
Yeah, sure.
So he kind of famously did this tweet that said, you know, I ran 80,444 surveys. You know, polls for Kamala Harris versus Trump, and in every single one, except X percent, that was really, really tiny, Kamala wins. And so after the election comes out, it was, you know, the memes were incredible. They were like, you should have ran 81,445. And like, so it's just one after the other. But I think it goes to this point of like, who are you surveying? Are you surveying the same group of people 80,000 times with the same methodology? Because then you're probably not going to get anything else.
Yeah,
and you're
right.
in your own bubble. Okay, one thing I want to talk about to sort of wrap us out here is Trump has made a lot of comments this week on education. And one of the more intense ones was that he wants to end the Department of Education and send all the education back to the states. Let's show this clip really quick.
One other thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children.
What do you think about that? Can that really happen?
This has been proposed before. It's when the Tea Party election of 2010, when Republicans overwhelmingly took the House of Representatives, and this was during the first Obama term. It was kind of a reaction to Obamacare and, you know, all the kind of political divides. It was a grassroots movement. That was actually one of the things that they were calling for back then too. And it's the view that the federal Department of Education can allow you to nationalize education and wreak all kinds of havoc on America's schools. The reality is that, you know, public schools are still very much a function of state budgets, right? It's in most states, it's the biggest part, or next to maybe your Medicaid population, depending on which state you are. I mean, you know, what you spend on K-12 education is a huge part of your budget. The amount you get from the federal government is actually a very small percentage of the total. So if you did away with the Department of Education, would you undo the finances of America's public schools around the country? And no, you know, it's not like you would be defunding them in some way. So that's, you know, it's a way of basically trying to get, you know, the federal government out of the business of monitoring or creating policies that have to be implemented in public schools. You know, I would put this one up there at number, I don't know, 15, 16, 17. What Donald Trump's not talking about are the huge drivers of our debt and deficit. He refuses to. Our entitlements, these fiscally imbalanced programs that are oriented towards older Americans. And as I get older, I care about issues facing older Americans. The reality is we did a pretty good job in the post-World War II era of protecting older Americans against indigent, you know, poverty in their old age. I mean, we've got a healthcare system for them. We have a retirement pension program basically for them, but they've been badly out of balance for a long time. And it is this huge burden that we've been putting on the shoulders of young Americans for a long time. And so these are actually at kind of a crisis point, and it's been a decade since we had something that looked like the political will to deal with those. And then we all have to give Paul Ryan, the former speaker, credit for that, because he staked his entire political career on shining a light on this. And you had the Simpson-Bowles Commission during the Obama years, which was actually, I thought, a very good federal commission where it looked like we were making some headway on these issues. And then things changed for a whole bunch of reasons, and we're back to kind of kicking the can down the road. And that's what we should probably be focused on. I really don't know that the quality of America's schools are going to change for better or worse a whole lot if the Department of Education exists or not. But I do know that the future wages and opportunities for America's young people are going to be skewed in the wrong direction if we don't take care of some of these bigger issues. So we have a dynamism problem. I mean, it doesn't feel like that living in Austin, Texas. This is one of the most dynamic parts of the country. But across the country, we should have more people making, building, and creating good things. And that's the best way to get higher paying jobs. It's the best way to get more job satisfaction for those who have jobs. It's the best way to create upward mobility prospects for more people, because people tend to job hop their way up. And when you have a dynamic turning economy with a lot of new things starting, that's kind of a recipe for success. And we are doing things from the cost of housing, which is mostly a local and sometimes state issue, to the cost of higher education, which we've talked about, to these future debt burdens, which have very real effects on the economy as a whole. All of these disproportionately affect the future well-being of America's young people. So we've been taking care of older Americans for a long time. We need to start thinking about younger ones. And I don't think the Department of Education has a whole lot to do with that. So that's what I would really hope that this next administration would actually start talking about more and focusing on. And Trump has never shown any interest in these issues. In fact, it's the opposite. I think he's wanted to promise older people that we're not going to touch Social Security, we're not going to touch Medicare, it's all going to be fine. Nobody really knows how long we can get away with this. I mean, we do know kind of like when the Social Security Trust Fund runs out of money, but like when, it's hard to know, because we are the United States, like what it means to be running the kinds of deficits that we are and the kind of debt we're amassing, because we're a different country than every other country in the world. And that gives us kind of a false sense of confidence about the future sometimes, I think. And I worry about that. So that's what I wish we would be talking about, rather than whether to shut down the Department of Education or kind of chip around the edges of certain budgetary issues, but to go right where the big problems are.
It's interesting. We just had Scott Galloway on the podcast, and he's been really talking about that a lot.
It's a big issue of his, yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting because he has in his Twitter bio, or has historically, a product of big government. And so he and I have a ton of respect for Scott. I don't always agree with him on everything and all, but I like talking to people I don't agree with all the time. And so he simultaneously seems to think that we need a bigger government, while also thinking that we are robbing from the youth to give to the old, which is his sort of tagline now. Do you think that this administration, I mean, we have this Department of Doge, right? And we have, Elon and Vivek and all this enthusiasm coming in to the government, and this idea about cutting efficiency or cutting inefficiency and adding in more efficacy. Do you think, can we tackle efficiency in government without tackling Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid?
Yeah, I mean, you can tackle efficiency in government by just trying to undo unhelpful regulations that are a drag on the economy or that are not necessary. And so you have the Social Security, you have the Medicare issue, which need to be dealt with legislatively. They can also be done just by the formula. It's these complex formulas for the way the programs are administered, but they really do need to be overhauled by law, I think. But you can do a lot to undo regulations that make it harder to build things, that make it harder to bring a product to market, and all those kinds of things that Elon Musk is talking about. Al Gore was supposed to be the reinventing government vice president back in the 90s. We've gone through, throughout the past generation, a number of efforts and promises to actually streamline, simplify, deregulate the federal government. And it's hard to point to something that's been all that successful. So they are not going to be able to wave a wand. I think, I'm a fan of picking your fights very carefully and saying which parts of the economy do we think are unnecessarily regulated or inhibiting innovation or blocking entrance from the marketplace or favoring incumbents and making it harder for the little guy. There's plenty of areas, whether it's the EPA or whether it's labor or whether it's a whole range of different regulations which affect product commercialization, those sorts of things. I think you should pick those areas that you think are kind of most ripe for disruption from a regulatory reform vantage point, and just go after them. These broad ones, and the Trump administration tried to did this last time. There's talk of doing it again. Like for every new regulation, we take 2 off the books. Well, that sounds great, but you can implement one very costly regulation and then eliminate two that really aren't having that much of an effect on things. And so that strikes me as kind of a blunt instrument and wouldn't be that effective in the long run in terms of, if you really want impact, measured as increased GDP, increased wages, increased innovation, you should pick your fights more carefully than that. So that's what I'm hopeful they'll do. And right now, I think they have a general idea. In terms of the specifics, they're going to have to tell us what they're looking at. But I would encourage them to focus, on 5 or 6 major areas that they want to kind of free up, to liberate, basically, and go after those. Instead of some kind of just general formula that can be kind of gamed, which is what I think cut 2 regulations for everyone that can kind of be gained.
Yeah. I think that is often the problem. Is it sounds so much easier than it is. I mean, having spent 3 minutes talking to a few regulators multiple times, it's an awful job.
Oh, it's terrible.
I kind of had a chuckle from the people who were like, yeah, Elon Musk only gets a job for 18 months in the government. I'm like, yeah, that sounds nice, as opposed to 4 years. You think he wants to be doing that for 4 years?
Yeah,
I surely wouldn't.
No.
So it's interesting. Okay, I want to close out here with really just the last idea of, you've been in policy related to education, you've been in policy related like broadly to the federal government, with cities, now with talking about civil service. Where do you think most people who are not involved with politics at all, where should they be going to get information to stay up to date and relevant and learn without getting inundated and overwhelmed with the amount of information out there? Mm-hmm. You guys have a new newsletter.
We have a new newsletter, yeah, and we are going to be launching our new online magazine in about a month called Civitas Outlook. We have a new, our website's being completely overhauled. It'll be ready in about 3 or 4 weeks.
Well, what's the URL?
civitas.utexas.edu.
It rolls off the tongue.
Yeah,
that's really
right.
Good. You could tell you guys are.
You can tell it's a university.
That at least showed us.
That's the that'll change. Right now, that's the university website. And the website's kind of a placeholder.
But you could just probably Google Civitas.
If you give Google Civitas Institute, University of Texas, you'll find it.
Yeah, you'll find it.
We'll have Civitas Outlook. Richard Reinsch, the founding editor of Law and Liberty, is our editor now, and he's lining up a great bunch of content. And so we'll be publishing a lot of articles about what's going on in the world in economic policy, political liberty, what's happening in the courts, and why we should care. So that's going to be a big part of what we do, and I'd encourage people to sign up for our newsletter, which you can find on our site now, and you'll be able to start receiving those articles in about a month's time.
And you can sound smart to all your friends.
That's right. You can cite all
the studies,
cite the studies, drop some highfalutin sounding academic names, and but do say Civitas Institute as much as you possibly can. If you have a large following, please include that in your tweets, and push people our way. So I'm excited about what we're building there. And there's other, there's other places where you can get a wide range of good information.
You always read everything that comes out from them related to the economy, business, policy.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a huge fan of The Economist, the magazine. Yeah. So I read The Economist regularly just because I love their global perspective, and I love what they do. And that is one of my ongoing critiques of American media. We've become much more insular. I mean, you would think now that we're a full generation into the internet era, we'd all be more globally aware. It's really hard to find news about what's going on around the world. I mean, even the top papers, they front load everything now with what's going on in American politics or whatever. You've got to click on the World tab at the New York Times or whatever, scroll down to figure out what's going on around the world. I still love watching the BBC from my UK days for that reason. They'll take you around the world, and and you learn about what's going on, and you have a hard time hearing about that. So The Economist is great that way. I'm a big fan of our friends at the Dispatch. I think that they produce some really great newsletters about what's going on, and they're very clear. They come from a center-right point of view, but they dispassionately report the news, and they just do really good reporting. It's very comprehensive, and they have individual newsletters which are helpful. Scott Lincecum was just here at UT giving a talk. He writes their weekly newsletter on trade issues and economic policy more generally, which I find very useful. They've got political analysis, which gives you a good peek inside what's going on in Washington. So they're a great new, fairly new 5-year-old organization that I find is really worthwhile. And I work my way around the op-ed pages of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. I'm an Atlantic subscriber. I read kind of all these sorts of things. So you just get a sense of what people are are thinking.
Arthur Joyce essays in The Atlantic are beautiful.
They're great. Yeah.
Not so much, economics or business.
Yeah, no, just about well-being and
Yeah.
how to live your best life. He's been great that way. But no, I hope as the Civitas Institute starts standing up, we're going to be publishing a lot of papers on policy and stuff. I think it's meant to convert academic research into accessible, digestible policy briefs, and then articles on Civitas Outlook that are 1,000 words long that you can read in under 10 minutes or 10 minutes or less. And will hopefully be informative for people. But I encourage everyone to read kind of broadly. Don't get stuck on that one author, that one site. You need multiple perspectives. And I'm always inherently suspicious of where a writer's trying to take me anyway. That's just my nature, So I'm always trying to figure out what the presuppositions are, where they're leading me. Even ones that I know and like. It's like I want to see kind of the counter view, and I'm sort of dispositionally wired that way. Which I guess has made me kind of a decent generalist over the years on policy issues. But I would encourage more people to do that.
I like to steal Tim Ferriss's question sometimes, which is like, what is the book that you've gifted the most? So not like recency bias. What's the most recent book that you've read or loved? But like, what's a book you keep coming back to or you give to others?
It's a great question. It's so funny because it kind of depends who the other person is. I'll have a few.
Allow you a few.
I'll have a few.
No more than
few
3
books. Yeah, no, I won't go crazy there. I'll answer it with just one book. One book that I come back to over the years is G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy, and it doesn't have anything to do with policy. It's his wide-ranging kind of defense and apologetic for his journey into eventually Roman Catholicism. And I'm not Catholic, but it's this. It's one of the most quotable books. There's something on every page, these astute observations, but it's this great tour of the sort of the fairy tale quality of the world, and that the advantage that you get from never losing the ability to see the world as a magical and beautiful place. That he has a line in there that says, it's like a 2-year-old, or a 5-year-old would be excited if you said you opened the door and there's a dragon behind it. A 2-year-old gets excited when you just told them you opened the door. It's like that sort of childlike wonder with like things that are to us now just pedestrian and basic. There was a time when they were exciting, and it's not a long book, but sometimes I tell people when I read it the first time, it was like I read it twice because I'd read a page and I'd be like, what? Then I'd read the page again and flip it over. And Chesterton gets quoted a lot, and you don't even have to follow his journey of faith to appreciate kind of the richness of his insights. But that one, I read that one early in my career when I've met people over time who seem sort of stuck, or they or dealing with kind of the doldrums of life. I find that it's just an encouraging read because it really kind of reminds you that we live in this wonderful world that's magical. There's a lot we just don't understand. And that's kind of the fun of it, and that's, I like listening to science podcasts because I'm not a scientist, and I love hearing people talk about, certain breakdowns in Einstein 4-dimensional space-time right now, because it's like, we don't know where we're going with this. And it's like, it should freak me out, but I kind of think it's great that there's still so much about the universe that we don't know. And that's one book that I found,
ever a moment where you were like, this isn't going to work? I'm totally an actual billionaire multiple times over who's run $100 billion company. How do we steal her homework? How do we learn lessons from somebody who has won so many times in so many businesses? And in the same conversation, she actually is one of the most powerful women of all small business in the US right now as the administrator of the SBA, the Small Business Administration. So not only does she share lessons about what it takes to build a big, huge company, but she also shares lessons about how do you find money hidden in plain sight in the government from the SBA for you, and what is the future going to hold for small business. I'm really excited about this episode. Not very many people get a chance to sit down with the head of the SBA in her office and see behind the scenes what is going to happen to small businesses today. You are going to want to listen to this episode. Kelly, I'm so excited you're here.
Cody, I'm thrilled to be with you.
You grew up on a farm and came from a lot of struggle and strife that only entrepreneurs know. Can you tell me about that time?
Well, it was incredible to grow up on a family farm. And at the time, I grew up in a house that had no upstairs heating. So we'd wake up in the morning in the winter and there would be frost inside the windows. But we never thought that was anything that would be different or wrong with that. We just had electric blankets that we slept under. But I saw how hard my family worked and I was inspired by it. I saw my grandmother writing the commodity futures prices on the Formica countertop. And then when my grandfather and dad would come in for lunch, they'd look at the prices and go back out. And that's where I first got my interest in finance and markets. And I saw my mom and dad building their trucking company together and dealing with the Interstate Commerce Commission filings and the paperwork. And I saw our truck drivers coming over to collect their paychecks while my mom wrote them out. And it really impressed upon me that, wow, they're providing livelihood and they're building something for people, that people are coming to us asking them to haul loads of grain off their farm, not just our farm, but theirs. And my parents sponsored the softball team in our small town. Like I saw and what other small businesses did. And so I also saw how the toll it took on my dad, like how hard he worked, 20-hour days planting crops or baling hay, just the hard physical labor that he did it out of love for us. I mean, he wasn't always able to be at our sports games. And that was totally understood by us. Like that made us tougher. We could come home and say, Dad, we won the game. Here's how it went. And he's like, well, I won the game for you guys today too. And, it gave me a love of work. So I worked in the fields growing up a lot. I worked in our cattle lot. I showed cattle in 4-H. I learned to sew my clothes because if I wanted a nice graduation dress or a dress in college for a formal, I would sew that. And then, all the way to, getting waitressing jobs to fill in for high school and college expenses and having that experience working in small businesses, waitressing, working in retail stores. And that gave me such a strong, well-rounded experience. That's why I'm so honored to serve at the SBA, to serve the small businesses that I know firsthand what they mean on our main streets.
So good. I also think I've met a few farmers, and you guys are totally better at Wall Street commodity trading than the best suits and ties. I mean, I think the drawl is always the giveaway. That's when I know I'm in trouble because they give me a little, well, hey, I don't know about that. And then they know about that. So I got a lot of respect for farmers.
Well, they have a lot of skin in the game. I mean, nothing like having thousands of bushels of a cash crop on your hands to force a decision.
One of the things I was curious about is you and your husband have run multiple businesses together and seem very aligned. What's the secret to doing that?
Boy, that's a great question. First of all, I'm incredibly blessed. That's the first open secret right there. Well, I am so blessed to have met him at a time in my life when, things could have gone either way. I thought, I've been moving around the country for 10 years, taking increasingly more responsible jobs. And I thought coming to Atlanta was going to be another stop on that career trajectory where I was working to find my fitting. I'd just gotten my CFA and had worked in private equity, had worked in as an equity analyst, and then was interested in doing investor relations. And I ended up joining the executive leadership team, ultimately working my way up to that. But we both just connected on our Midwestern values, our love of our families, our work, our shared passion for improving ourselves and giving back. Like, we're both very altruistic, but we're also competitive. So we kind of feed on that. And I'm just so blessed. We get along great. We love talking about business. And we both understand what's important in life. And it's not the monetary. I mean, people make a lot of our wealth or success, but it's something we don't really spend a lot of time talking about.
Interesting. Yeah, you're not very flashy.
Yeah, I drive a Kia Telluride. I
Get
do
out of
have
town.
Yeah.
Really? You don't want to roll up in the Lambo?
Made
to the
in Georgia.
SBA?
Well, I'll admit I do. I have a Porsche, and I do love, and because when I was 11, living on our farm, a guy in a Porsche came driving up to drop off something for my dad from a grain elevator. And I was like, what is that car? And when I found out it was a Porsche from age 11, I always wanted one. So, I do think it's beautiful engineering, and they go fast, and I love racing and all that. But I'm most comfortable just driving around town in my Kia Telluride, made in Georgia.
I love that. Also, I'm a bad driver, so I shouldn't be trusted with nice cars. So I'm into that. Okay, so you chose well with your partner. And the only reason I want to ask one more question about partnership, because I think, at least for me, I work with my husband. It's the best thing that I ever did, and also the hardest. Like, our first year working together was really, really hard. And I wasn't sure we didn't make a mistake at first. I was like, oh my gosh, can we really do these two things? And now it's a gift that I feel like was taken from us as society. Like, it was bad to work with your family. It's bad. It's nepotism. It's all these things. And I think that was a giant lie. And instead, it's really beautiful to get to build with your family. Like, what do you think? And what advice would you give some young man or woman out there that could learn maybe what partnership is like in business and love and marriage?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. It is such a gift. And I saw my parents working together on our farm every single day, building my dad's trucking company together. My dad started it the year I was born after he got out of the National Guard. He'd learned to drive a fuel truck in the Guard and thought, okay, I'll add trucking to our farm, which was transformative for our family, just particularly in the lean years of farming where negative cash flow. And so I saw my mom helping my dad build that business and how amazing it was to have a family that all worked together. And now we're on the 5th generation on our family farm. It's incredibly rewarding, the pride and the ability to work through the challenges together. I think it's something that our country is a little bit lost. And you've pointed that out. I've heard you talk about like 80% of people in America in the 1800s were small business owners, and now it's 6%. And I think that's tragic. And I really appreciate all the work you do to encourage entrepreneurship, even though back on the farm and in the small town I grew up in, everyone was an entrepreneur, but we never knew that word.
Yeah, right.
It was just everyone felt like they did what they did because it was their calling.
I think one of the interesting parts about you is you have built all these really big businesses previously, cross-sector, and yet, you started really without a lot, which I'm sure small business owners can relate to. They might hear how big your businesses are and not think that you understand what it's like to be a little guy. But was there ever a moment where you were like, this isn't going to work, I'm totally going to fail, and we're going to lose everything?
Over and over and over. That is essentially it's the setbacks and the rejection that I remember more sometimes. That's what always fueled me. And
do you have a big juicy one?
Oh my goodness. Well, from my earliest time in my career, I mean, I applied for jobs I didn't get. I went back and got those jobs. I've never accepted rejection. I've been tenacious about it, but I've also had huge setbacks, whether it's in working on deals or working on businesses that we thought that was the end of the opportunity. And just kept going. And I think it comes from really how I was raised. I mean, on a farm, you are raised in that situation. You don't have any guarantees, and you figure it out, and you work hard until it's done. And I think just that tenacity really saw me through a lot. And, certainly building a career from Wall Street now into the cabinet, from rural America, I think that just really taught me to dig in, keep going, keep learning, and keep the curiosity about how things work, and keep asking questions, and never accept the first no.
Yeah. Yeah, you seem like when we were talking kind of behind the scenes, you're like, I like it. I want to be in there. I want to be like making a difference. And I was like, oh, wasn't it scary to run for Senate? That sounds horrifying. You were like, no, like put me in, coach. So you got a little of that inner psychopath. I'm into that.
Yeah. Well,
What about, so you owned an MBA, a WNBA team, which seems incredibly hard in just every aspect, not as much funding, lower ticket sales, and then there was inner turmoil in the WNBA. What was the hardest moment for you running that business?
well, I think the biggest decision came when my business partner and I, we were 50-50 owners, but before that, we were minority owners. And there came a point where the majority owner decided to sell. And we had to look at each other and say, do we want to step up and be 50-50 owners? And I was running a big part of our publicly traded company at the time. And I had to have confidence in the team that we brought on to really run that business day to day. And also the funding. I mean, it was, it's not an inexpensive endeavor to sink money into that every single year.
Was it public how much that was?
No, but it's a couple million, and it was, we'd hoped to be able to get it to break even, but to the point, back then, the bigger decision was to say, is this a go or no go? And I believe that when life opens a door for you, and like to walk through it, and that life had opened a door for me as a professional sports team owner. And walking away at that time didn't seem like a good option. And I'm really glad we walked through it. We owned the team for a decade. And it was very grassroots. In fact, I was working with a reporter one time and pitching a story. I mean, I was, making sure that we got the visibility. I had this vision because of what I'd seen living in Chicago during the Bulls run in the 90s. And I thought, my goodness, I see what sports do for a community. They really bring it together. And I think Atlanta could be a great sports town. And so we invested on that basis to not have this as a hobby, but to make this a business and a great community contribution. And we were so glad that we walked through that door and did that for a decade for our fans, for our community, to elevate the sport. And it turned out to be such a good, I learned so much being a sports team owner that applied to business. Because in business, sometimes you can kick the can on a problem. In sports, you can't do that.
Why? Everybody's just yelling at you all the time?
Well, because in sports, the scoreboard shows the results every single day. The ticket sales show the results every single day. The coaching shows the results. And so you have to make those decisions game time. And so I started doing that in business, running my businesses like a coach would run a team. And I became a lot more effective, decisive, and not afraid about what decisions were around the next corner. It just really emboldened me to make those decisions and keep going.
I'm a huge Phil Jackson fan, and it really stuck with me a lot. I read his lessons often on how to be a good leader.
Yeah, the Zen master. Yeah.
He was. I never would have known.
Yeah, he was. He really ran an amazing team. When you read about the dynamics of the Bulls and how the players didn't necessarily all get along, but they brought so much electricity to the court, to the community. And it was just a huge lesson for me watching the Bulls. It was instructive, not just as a sports leader, but as a business leader.
What do you think your leadership style is? Like, you've been successful in WNBA, you've been successful in a Senate race, you're the administrator of the SBA, you've also run these huge public companies. How do you keep winning?
Well, I think it's you learn from the losses. And there's more losses than wins, to be honest. When you get to this point in life, you start looking back and you're saying, I'm really glad for some of those hard times. And some of those hard times were the best times. I think back to when our company was a startup. I mean, today it's a $100 billion Fortune 500 company, but when we had 100 people and it was working every single weekend without a single day off, straight through, get there early, leave late, come back, over and over, cancel the vacations. The birthday dinner turns into a due diligence review up in New York. All those things, those were the best times. I didn't need a birthday dinner. I didn't need the vacation. I mean, these were the things that built the trajectory for success. And so I'm always happy to run into the fire. It's why I was able to start a crypto company in 2017, because I love to see a challenge. And I'm so blessed. My husband, Jeff, was the founder of that Fortune 500 company. And he's a visionary who is an engineer. And he takes every problem apart at the nuts and bolts level. And that's kind of how we've worked through a lot of challenges. And I'm a little different. He's a genius. He's brilliant. I'm more of a hard worker. I didn't have the gifts of the intellect that he had, but I'm a hard worker. That's my superpower. And I have a deep well of curiosity. I love to get atomic level on things. That's why I was the only chartered financial analyst that's ever served in the U.S. Congress.
What?
So, yeah.
Okay, you're obviously smart if you have a CFA. That's like the highest, basically, level financial certification you can have. And the failure rate for like level 3 is something like 90% or something. It's like each level gets harder.
Yeah, well, I worked really, really hard on studying for it. And I made sure I passed every level on the first try. And it was a great challenge. And I love a challenge. And I think approaching everything like this is a challenge I can do makes all the difference, instead of, oh, I'm a victim, I'm a woman, only 11% of the people that pass this exam are women. I just said, I know I can do this. So I think accepting everything as a challenge as opposed to saying that it's all stacked against me makes all the difference.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there was a quote I was reading the other day. Somebody asked Michael Dell, they were like, Michael, how much did you work during those first, few years of building your company? And he was like, I worked all the hours. And so I think, is that what it takes to build a multi-billion-dollar company? Is there any way to build it with a 4-hour work week, a lifestyle business?
No, and why would you want to do that? I think part of the journey of life is creating and building and being with people. I mean, we haven't really talked about the people element. The most fascinating part of what I've experienced over my 30-plus year career is interacting with people, learning from them, and what works, what doesn't, how to succeed. And that doesn't come from just doing deals. That comes from experience at the negotiating table, walking away from it, coming back to it, having the discussions, whether it's internal within our own company. We used to promote internal dissent and debate. And then we'd make sure we pressure test everything internally and had the fights internally before we exposed them externally. And did things before we announced them. A lot of people love to run a company by press release and say, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. No, we didn't do any of that. We would do the thing and then we'd say, we've been doing this for a month and our customers love it. So I think, walking the walk, not just talking the talk, was so important. And it's about making sure that you have people that are bought into the vision for doing the work, not, taking the victory lap.
Yeah. How do you foster dissent in an organization? How do you get people to like competing for the best ideas?
Well, I think it goes back to the original question you asked me about what kind of leader am I? I'm a hands-on leader. I try to run as flat organizations as we can. Like, we're all on the same team. Like, the team first concept is we're all in this together. If you fail, I fail. And so I want you to succeed. And that's why I am really careful about the teams I pick. And, loyalty is important, but you're being loyal to me if you say, Kelly, I don't think that's a good idea. It's not disloyalty. I don't want to be encircled by yes men. I want people to say what you're doing is maybe not the optimal way to do this. Have you thought about this? And I may take it on board. I may not, but I'm like, thank you for letting me know. I'm glad we've had this conversation. And so I think just really encouraging communication and dialogue. I feel like someday communication is going to be a lost art within the business world.
It does feel like that. But, and maybe that does go back to, sort of this, you've played a lot of games where you either won or lost publicly. Running a public company, got to have quarterly results, WNBA, nightly scoreboard. And so unlike a lot of people in the government, you're like, no, there are consequences to my actions, which is probably kind of shows across all of your businesses. So if you're talking to a small business owner right now who is worried about inflation and what's happening around them, what would you tell the people that you're about to see on the street?
Well, the great thing about small businesses is they live in a very dynamic environment. And so I hear from them all the time as I travel across the country. And what I'm hearing is that they want taxes to be made permanent, the tax cuts to be made permanent. They want taxes to be low. They want regulations cut. They want fair trade. They're excited about the conversation we're having on making America produce things again, onshoring our manufacturing. And I also think small businesses need a focus on skilled workforce by education. I mean, we really need to look at our educational system and say, what are the skills and the trades of the future? And so that's critically important because so many small businesses can't fill roles, can't find the skilled workforce. So we're working with small businesses across that entire spectrum to make sure that they have the resources they need. Chief among those at the SBA is access to capital, which is our bread and butter, to help small businesses access lending through our partners in the private sector, your local community bank, or things like a credit union, and making sure that they have the lifeblood of their business, which is capital.
Yeah. So do you think that you guys, as an administration overall, will small business owners get those permanent tax cuts? Will there be like a pro small business environment? Because lots of people say they love small business. But do you think that is actually going to happen?
Well, look, there's no bigger fan of small business than President Trump and this administration. And I do believe we're working quickly toward Congress having that 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act extended, hopefully made permanent. That will provide tremendous certainty for small businesses to invest and grow and hire and drive our main streets. And I believe manufacturers and businesses of all kinds are really spring-loaded, just waiting for that tax cut to come through. But in the meantime, we're working really hard on deregulation because regulation, and in fact, the Biden administration passed $1.7 trillion in regulation, setting an all-time record by many multiples of massive regulation. That's a tax on small business, disproportionately on our manufacturers as well.
Yeah, we were reading some statistics earlier about how that is somewhere between $8,000 and maybe some other people say $15,000 per employee by federal taxes on small businesses. There's a real regulatory drag, it seems like.
Yeah.
And so, let's talk a little bit about the things we can control, because I think sometimes hearing about everything the administration is going to do, you're like, great, I'll keep working while we wait for that. So one of the cool things you guys have done is what I call like showcasing money hiding in plain sight. So the SBA obviously provides tons of loans to small businesses. What do you think most small business owners don't realize they have access to with the SBA that they do? Where is your like hidden free money?
Well, actually, that's a great question. I actually think the SBA is not well understood. What we do is provide government-backed guarantees to private sector loans and loans that may not be extended but for that government guarantee. And what I love about these programs is they're self-funding. They're not taxpayer funded. When run properly with the right underwriting guidelines, these loans pay for themselves while generating access to capital for the small business, growing the tax base, driving employment. So it's a really free enterprise / private public partnership type thing that is unique in government. Usually it's government giving a grant. What we focus on is making sure that qualified businesses who can't get capital elsewhere can get them through the SBA, those loans. And that's what I'm really proud of, is that we're making these loan programs better and more accessible.
Yeah. And so if you're a small business owner listening right now, like, is there any downside to going to your local SBA office and just saying, hey, I want to see if I could be pre-approved for a loan for X or Y or Z? Like, should every small business owner be at least meeting with their local SBA?
Absolutely. So we have 68 offices across the United States at the SBA. And what you can do is start having those conversations. Maybe you don't need capital right now, but you need access to some of the counseling that we do through our small business development companies that really help small businesses build toward accessing capital or planning their expansion. And we can work across the federal government to connect them to other resources that, as you say, capital hiding in plain sight. Like, could there be other programs? The SBA also oversees government contracting. We have to ensure that small businesses get about 23% of federal contracts. And we have programs to help them onboard into federal government contracting, which I'll admit is not the easiest thing to navigate in the world. And we're trying at the SBA to demystify that and make sure that it's really small businesses that are getting that benefit.
It's so good. So we'll put it in the show notes. You should definitely go to the SBA. We'll link where the field offices are. No downside to saying, how could you guys help me? And the entire job of those field offices is to give you resources. That's what they're paid to do.
That's right. And we have lending folks in our offices that can help direct you to what those loan services are, or they may say maybe what you want more of is more of the counseling side and working with our partners in that.
Yeah. And can they help you put together a package to actually get money? So if you're like, hey, I want to get a loan from the SBA, here's sort of what I have. Can they look at it and go, well, you should beef up this part of your business plan. You should think about it this way?
Yeah. So the lender relations specialist in each district will, kind of navigate you through that program. They'll connect you with a lender. We actually have an online lender match service that you can access as a small business just through our website and see if there's a lender that might be interested in your type of, sector or type of loan. So you can do it that way too, even if you don't want to go into an office.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I also know that you guys have a list of like the top 200 or something most common lenders with the SBA. So you can kind of see who is playing this game often. I think a lot of times people are like, the SBA loans are really hard to get, which is true in some ways, but also it might be because you're going to a lending institution that doesn't actually work with the SBA and they say they're a big lender, but they're in the bottom quartile. And so if you go to people who are at the very top, and I won't name names, so everybody's our buddy, but it seems like if you go to people who already do the thing, then they will have a higher likelihood of getting approved for the thing.
That's very true. And then there's also just the fact that these are government guaranteed loans. Certainly the lender takes the first loss. So these are underwritten to traditional private sector lending underwriting standards. But at the same time, we have to ensure that they're underwritten so that the government isn't put in the position, or the taxpayer, which is also a small business, is put at the position of funding losses. So we want to make sure that portfolio is performing as it should. And generally it does. We operate a $444 billion loan portfolio at the SBA.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
You also have incredibly low default rates.
Yes.
Like, I think actually, what surprised me is a lot of people, we teach thousands of people how to buy businesses and we use SBA loan programs all the time. And people were like, normal people can't buy a business. The loans, they're underwater. You have this personal guarantee. It's so big and scary. And it is. It should be. Anytime you take somebody else's money, you should be really thoughtful about it. But, your loan rates are incredibly low. So I also think the SBA is a great filter for, should you even buy this business?
That's right.
Right? If
Yes.
the SBA won't approve it, is it good?
That's right. And I have talked to a number of business owners who have said to me, I got my first loan through the SBA. I would not be in business today. I was a sous chef. My wife was a teacher. We barely had any assets, but we had a great idea. They got an SBA loan, but they also said we were never so happy when we paid off that SBA loan. And it gives them the discipline and the confidence to get into business and then start repaying that loan.
Yeah, and now you guys have done some interesting things where I saw for the first time ever, you can start to have multiple people on an SBA loan to diversify some of your single party personal guarantee risk, which I think is really lovely for people who don't have a lot of assets.
That's right. We've tried to make the programs, make sure that they are performing well, but make them realistic for how deals in the private sector actually work. And a lot of times when you have people designing loan programs that haven't been in the private sector, that don't understand how deals work, that they may not have that flexibility. So we're trying to make sure we have the belt and suspenders on the underwriting standards, but also make sure that they work in the real world.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate it. I think a lot of times the SBA loan not going through was a benefit to the buyer of the business, and they didn't even realize it.
Well, and that's right. We don't want to saddle people with loans and potential defaults and bankruptcies that we could have foreseen by having the prudent underwriting standards, which we just put back in place at the SBA, and that will strengthen the programs back to where they were.
Yeah, I like it. What would you say to people who say, man, the SBA loans take too long, and so they kill my deals, or I can't buy a business because they're not fast enough?
Yeah, I hear that, but I also think that that is where we need to make sure that we have the right lender on the program, and that's why our lender match program was developed to ensure that borrowers are talking to a full spectrum of potential lenders, but also we are being self-critical and looking at where do we have too much red tape and bureaucracy, and how do we run this like the business that our small businesses have to operate. They have to do more with less. They have to navigate all kinds of bureaucracy. We should be the last place that they're encountering massive red tape. So we are taking a hard look at that. And we actually set up a red tape hotline at redtape@sba.gov to let our small businesses tell us where are they struggling, not just in the loan process, but where are federal regulations weighing them down needlessly? Because I saw it firsthand when I was in the Senate. Like, there's a lot of focus on legislating and rulemaking and regulations. There's not a lot of focus until we got to DOGE about how do we roll some of that back. And President Trump is leading the charge on that again. He did it in 2016, eliminating multiple regulations for each new one. We're doing it again, at least eliminating 10 for every new regulation. And that's something that I think is picking up momentum, not just in the federal government, but in the states where there's also a lot of regulation.
So let's look into the future. If they don't get access to somebody like you, now they get to sit and listen and hear from you on what is the future with this administration with small business, and what are some of the initiatives that you think are going to be really incredible for small business owners.
One of the things I'm most excited about is our Made in America manufacturing initiative at the SBA, which amplifies President Trump's America First agenda. And what does that mean? It means we're creating opportunities in America that had been hollowed out from us over the last 3 decades, where we lost something like 70,000 factories, 5 million jobs in our manufacturing heartlands are gone. We can do that again in America. And I have been across this country going through factories and hearing from owners of, and these are small businesses, most manufacturers, 99% of them are small businesses. And they've been telling me, I have been fighting the notion that we can't make things in America for 2 decades. And it's happening. And I see it as tremendous opportunity for small businesses because they supply the larger producers with the subcomponents and the parts and the materials that they need. They provide the restaurants for the workers. They provide the retail stores. I think we're on the cusp of not just a manufacturing, but an America First renaissance in this country. And I hope everyone will be a part of it, because I think if we can get the tax cuts done, the deregulatory agenda continuing to advance, we're really at the dawn of what President Trump says is truly a golden era, because for too long, people have underestimated the American worker and American industry, and we're getting back to that now.
I get chills. Well, I'm so appreciative of your initiatives to push forward small business. I can tell because I've met with your staff and other members of your team that you guys are actually really pushing for the little guy. And so I hope people take you up on all the initiatives at the SBA and go and look at the resources and meet with your local members. And then also you guys do an incredible job highlighting content too. So if there's like companies that, are small businesses that want to get highlighted as well, I know that there are spaces on the website there. Administrator Loeffler, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Cody, it was great to be with you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. If you want to see all the resources we talked about today, we actually compiled them for you into this little report. If you want that, then click below. You can get the link right here for all the SBA resources. If you guys liked this episode, wait until you see the one we have coming next. If you are not subscribed to the podcast, like apparently something like 60% of you guys are not right now, we are missing out. You guys are going to want to have a notification for the next podcast, because we are going to find more hidden money and we are going to hear from more world leaders to see how you can change your life and your business. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. We called this podcast The Big Deal because you are a big deal to me. No matter how small your business is or how big your business is or how big or small your life is, you really matter. And I hope you felt that in this episode. We are here to make sure that you continue to have the thing I believe leads to more freedom than anything else, which is money. I think that's the lifeblood of small business, is making sure cash flow stays in. And I think that is the answer to freedom for most people, is when you have more cash, you can actually architect the world around you. And so I want to thank you for being with us in this podcast. It means the world to me. And I just want you to know that we do everything in our power every single week to make sure that you are still the biggest deal on this podcast. We'll see you next week.